Well, if it's true that anything that we want to do or become, we have to first learn it. And if all of us want to be wealthy, where do we go to learn how to be wealthy? Well, how many of you remember the board game Monopoly? We're going to talk today about the 7 wealth strategies and principles that you can pull out of the game of Monopoly. And I want you all to listen closely as we walk through some of the things that are just priceless that we can gain just from this simple game. And now I want you to consider for a minute. Let's go to my whiteboard. When we think about just the word monopoly, right? And we think about monopoly. Now think about this. This is really saying of someone having a complete advantage, someone having no competition, someone being in a situation where basically all of the money and resources will flow to them because they have control. So monopoly, again, definitely has to do with ownership, right? It has to do with control. It has to do with no competition. And it also has to do with freedom. So just this word monopoly is very, very powerful, right? And so, when we think about this, we're going to really dig deep into how some of these ingredients show themselves when you just understand some of the principles. Let's go to the board and make sure everyone remembers this beautiful game. All right, it's time for a brief introduction to make sure that we remember the game of Monopoly. Now, those of you that are serious, please forgive me. I know you know about this, but we got to talk about the game. And those of you that don't know the game, you need to know the game. It's a wonderful lessons we can learn from this. But let's take a look here. So here we have our board. Now, I went and got my board. I haven't seen my board in a while. I mean, this is my vintage board. And I want you to look down here. You can see I've got a few things set up here. So here we've got all the different pieces you can use. Now, how many of you put in the chat, what was your favorite piece of Monopoly? Like, what was your piece? Like the one that you always wanted to have or whatever, right? So which was your one? Like, no, I'm the dog. No, I'm the thimble. I'm the hat, right? Which one was yours, right? Put it in the chat. But you have all these different pieces that you can have. There was the man on the horse, the dog, the shoe, the car. I always, really like the car, so that was my one. There's been different monopolies that has changed some of these pieces, but you got your pieces that represents the different players. We also have all around the board, we have different properties. So you can see the prices below here. Here's Baltic Avenue for $60. And you got Mediterranean for $60. Some of you really, may target this. We'll talk about that later. And all the way around, we got some fun things like community chess and chance. Every now and then you land on these, you have to pull a card. And this kind of created the sense of, anything could happen, right? So this is a kind of anything could happen type of moment where you don't know what's going to happen when you flip the card. Just kind of representing things that happen in life, right? So I thought that was kind of cool about Monopoly as well. Check this out. There was a area on the board for income tax, right? If you land on here, you had to pay some more income taxes. So there was this whole issue, you just hate to land on that. Then you can go all around the board. We've got a lot of unique things, which we'll talk about later. Then we have free parking. Now, depending on house rules, how many of you out there had the situation where you say free parking, you can put money under free parking, right? Any fees you had to pay to the bank, taxes, all that stuff. Anytime something came up from these community chest, chance card, it's supposed to go into free parking. And whoever landed on free parking can keep the money. Now, that's not technically in the rules, but a lot of us played that way. Come on, you guilty too. So let's look at this. So here we got all of this. And then there was actually where you can land on to go to jail. Now there's some cards that are send you to jail, but if you landed on this, you had to go to jail as well. So this was kind of the situation. Now we also have our dice. And wherever we do, look at that double six. Don't get me start playing Monopoly with y'all right now. But look, you land whatever oh my God, these are some good rolls I'm doing. That's just still in my hand. I don't want to talk about it right now, but it's still in my hand, my Monopoly. Now I wanted to say this. I didn't want to bring this out just yet, but since I'm introducing, this game was made by Parker Brothers. And I just tell people all the time when I play this, as Michael E. Parker is my name. See, this goes back into my family heritage. This is why I've always been highly successful at Monopoly. And those of you that play with me, right now, this is my YouTube episode. There's nothing you can say right now. I have full control and I'm still the champion until someone dethrones me, right? But I just forgive me. I had to say that a little bit, but this is Parker Brothers. And This is something that was well thought out. And when you roll these dice, it determines how you move across the board, right? So you never knew what you're going to land on, right? In terms of what, you get, a 2, a 5, a 6, a 12, an 11. So this is, again, how the game was structured. Now, when you land on the board, so check out the board. We have these property cards, and as soon as you land on the board, you get these property cards, right, to tell you exactly what property you own. Now, this is going to be very important as we talk about some wealth principles, but these cards let us know what we own. Now, the other thing is, to pay for those properties, we had to use our money. Now, everyone starts off with $1,500, and you can see you get 2 of the 500s, 2 100s, and so forth and so on, and there's a distinct amount of money everyone's supposed to get. So you start with an equal playing field, which is kind of interesting, because in life, everyone doesn't start with an equal playing field. We know sometimes people start with a little bit more money than others, right? Sometimes it's a little bit disadvantaged, but it's kind of nice that in Monopoly, everyone starts on the same playing field, but then it's a roll of the dice to see how your life turns out in the game of Monopoly. So we have this here. Now, some other things I want to show you. Now, here is our real estate corner. So I hope you can see this. We've got some houses here. So a house might look like that, little greenhouse here. And this is something you can buy to put on your property, right? And after you get at least 4 houses on a property, you then qualify to buy a hotel. And so this is a very interesting dynamic about how Monopoly was to work. And if you have more houses or you have hotels, we'll put that back there, then someone had to pay you more, right, for landing on that particular property. So there you have it. This is a brief introduction to Monopoly. You all should remember the game and understand how it all works. Now we're going to go deeper into 7 principles of wealth that we can learn from this wonderful game. Let's go to principle number 1. All right, it's time to go into principle number 1. And the principle number 1 that we're going to break down is understanding the importance of cash flow. So this is something that is very real. And if you don't understand cash flow, you don't understand the true essence of wealth. Now, let's go to my whiteboard for a minute. And when we think about even the term cash flow, we understand that we're talking about real money that, when we think about cash, but we're also talking about a sense of flow. We're thinking about a river, something that moves. And so this is a consistent flow of cash or money that is able to come into our life, come into our home, right? So we're trying to, always understand, like, how can I get in a situation where, here I am, right? And let's just say I'm inside of my home, but there's a way that I have situations in which cash flow is coming in to my home consistently. So this is a very important aspect of wealth and something we all should be trying to create. So you learn this deeply. Now, just to, really see this in the game of Monopoly, let's head over to the board. All right, we're back at the board and we're breaking down principle number 1, understanding cash flow. Now, let's go here to the board. I want to show you something. So you see all these, different players over here. I told you I like the car. So let's just wipe out all those other people. Let's wipe them out. We don't need those over there right now. Forgive all the other players out there. We're going to just focus on the car. So this is a car that I used to like to focus on. And I want you to check out this on the board. It says collect $200 as you pass. Go. Okay. So when you pass through go, we roll the dice. If you go anywhere past go, every time you go around the board, I'm going to borrow from the bank here. So every time you pass go, you get $200. So this is a great example of cash flow. Right? So let me talk to you for a minute about cash flow. So we learned a little bit about cash flow, but every time you went around that go sign, no matter where you were in the game, how much money you had, if you had a lot of money or a little bit of money, you always felt excited to pass go. And every time you went around the board, you knew that was at least one guaranteed way that you were going to get $200 unless something happened, like you land on income tax or something weird happened. But for the most part, you always got that $200. This is a wonderful principle about wealth. Every time you went around that board, you were learning a principle that you want to set your life up where there's a cycle in your life that always brings in money no matter what. right? So no matter how the dice fall, no matter how long it takes me to get around, I know that's going to be there, right? So this is a great example, right? Let's go back to the board here. This is a great example as I pass go of always having a chance to collect cash flow. Now we know, there's a lot of other things that we learn through as we advance in more advanced areas of Monopoly where you can create cash flow through other things. And we'll talk about that. But we're going to just use this basic principle of passing go to show we all want that cycle where money keeps coming in. All right, let's break down the next principle. All right, it's time for principle number 2, and we're going to talk about the importance of property ownership. Monopoly teaches us that it's so important to own property or assets that can generate revenue, right? So it uses property, but even deeper than that, we're talking about revenue generating assets. Let's go to the whiteboard for a minute. Now, when you think about an individual, right, that is able to actually have an asset, let's say like a home here, right? So Monopoly really broke down the essence of property ownership being important. They made property ownership important, and not just any type of property ownership, right? So we understand that there is a principal residence that someone can own, right? And then there is rental property. Now, I want you to think about something for a minute. Now, all of you Monopoly players out there, and by the way, as I go through this, I want you all thinking about different, concepts and things that you can be learned that maybe I don't cover. Like, put it in the comments. What are some things that hit your mind that you think that we can learn from Monopoly, right? But when you think about principal residence and rental property, I want you to think about this question. In Monopoly, where was your house? Where did you live on the Monopoly board? I want y'all to kind of think about that for a minute. Like, put it in the comments. Where was your house? Well, I don't remember you having a house in Monopoly, right? You were just kind of there rolling the dice. Well, in essence, we really learn where the true game of wealth has a lot to do with property that generates income for you versus property that actually creates more of a debt or a cash money you have to put out of your life, right? Paying a mortgage and things of sort. Now, of course, there are things you can do where you can rent out rooms in your home and turn it into some sort of cash flow. But as a whole, principal residence is not really for that. So think about this. Monopoly focused on more of the rental property that we could buy that actually begin to pay rent to us, right? And this began to create a mindset for cash generating assets. This is a really key principle when we think about wealth. Let's head over to the Monopoly board and take a look at this in the real game. All right, we're back at the board and we're going to go deeper into principle number 2 about property ownership, income generating assets. Let's go to the board. So listen, I'm still here on go and I'm going to roll the dice here. Whoo, look at that, all the way to 7, a chance, but I'm going to ignore that chance. We're going to go around to 8, right? So you keep moving around the board, and I'm going to come all the way over here. I'm just going to force myself over here to the yellows because I really love these yellows, and so I love getting those over there. There's certain areas that, that have different values, okay? And you'll notice that on the board. So in Monopoly, we start to get a understanding about different areas of the board and different values. Over here, we've got more of the lower income properties, right? Here, we're getting more to maybe like according to like America society, because I don't believe in classes and so forth, but you kind of get to like what you would probably see as the middle class kind of sort of here, common people that are making good money, good property. And then you get here to more affluent neighborhoods, right, that are coming up here. And then you get to the highly affluent neighborhoods over here with the Green area, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and of course, Boardwalk and Park Place, which became some of the most famous because it's the highest property that's on the game of Monopoly. So when you look over here on the board, there's a rhyme or reason to how this was put on here, because we actually learned that there's different properties that hold different values. And what a great principle to learn about wealth and about real estate, about land and about property, that it matters where you are, what you buy, all these things matter. Now, what's kind of interesting is that I'm going to actually find these here. Let's go back to the board here, and I'm going to search here through the properties, and let's get to those kind of gold. I don't know if it's like gold, burnt orange or something, but let's go to those. And I want you to check something out. So if I buy these properties, okay, so in Monopoly, we learn about buying property. So for example, here at St. James, it's going to cost me what, $180, $180 for Tennessee and $200 for New York. So New York is a little bit more expensive. So what you notice here is that for these properties, I actually can read how much rent I get. So I get $16 on New York, $14 on Tennessee, and $14 on St. James. But also I learned, right, if I begin to put houses on some of these properties, right? So if I had, let's say I had 3 houses on St. James and I had 4 houses on New York just because I want to get big on New York. And then as I had 2 on Tennessee, I would be doing pretty good, right? So when you look at this, we start learning about property and about cash flow. So check this out. So if I've got 3 houses on St. James, let's find that, I make $550 every time someone lands on there. And this is giving you and simulating rental income, right? On Tennessee, having 2 houses, I may earn $200 every time. And then you can see on New York with 4 houses, I would earn $800. So this is the name of the game. And we learn about wealth, that you want to buy wealth producing assets, right? You want assets that generate wealth. So every time someone lands on these properties, it generates rental income. It simulates the day that someone's supposed to pay their rent, so to speak. So think about the more property I own that has assets that generate revenue for me, the more wealthy I'm going to be. So it's a wonderful thing when you start acquiring property in Monopoly, and then you start seeing. Now, some of you play where you got to go around the board one time before you can buy. Some say you can buy right away. It's, different rules you can go by, different house rules. But buying property is so important. Now, check this out. Once I have 4 houses, I can actually put a hotel and replace those houses. And if I was on New York with a hotel, I make $1,000. I mean, backbreaking when someone lands on that who's been playing the game and they, acquired some money and they land on this. Let's put the shoe on here, lands on my property, and they got to pay me $1,000. The name of the game is, the more that I understand about property, the more I acquire assets, these assets pay me. Right? Without me doing anything, when someone lands on it, I just get paid. This is a wonderful principle we need to understand about property and how property is an income generating asset. And we want to always have these types of assets in our life. Let's learn more about the next principle. All right, it's time for principle number 3. And we think about principle number 3. This is about how to create leverage through debt. How to use debt as a form of leverage to actually make a smart investment, right? To create wealth. Now let's go to the whiteboard for a minute. I want you to understand something, right? So when we think about wealth, we understand that there is good debt, right? And there is bad debt. Okay. So these are wealth principles we must understand. We think about bad debt. We're thinking about things like credit cards, right? Using debt for, entertainment, right? Anything that does not really generate any wealth return, right? Whereas good debt, we're thinking about, leveraging loans, being able to make, investments as a result, right, of the debt that you may have used, right? So we talk about, again, OPM, the ability to use other people's money, right? This is a wealth principle. This is why very wealthy people who could buy that fancy car in all cash or buy that home in all cash still don't. so they can use someone else's money less expensively and keep their cash and then use that money as leverage to expand their wealth. So the more money you have, the less you have to use it. This is a fundamental principle that we can learn. And this principle is actually a hidden principle right inside the Monopoly game if you really dig it out. Let's go to the board. Let me explain. All right, we're back at the board again, breaking down principle number 3, which is about leverage and leveraging debt, right? And so we understand in Monopoly that we can actually begin to do this. Now let's go to the board. Let me explain. So let's say that this is my situation where I have these properties. I still own my 3 properties here in New York, Tennessee, and St. James, but I also now have acquired Kentucky and Indiana, and I have Boardwalk and I have Pennsylvania. Okay. So keep in mind that when you get all 3 of any property, okay, you actually can double the rent. That's the rule. You pay double the rent if you have all of the properties, right? So technically, if someone lands on it, you can double the rent. But the main thing about having all 3 properties is you can't put a house on any of those properties until you have all 3 properties or all 2 properties that go with that particular suite of properties. Okay, so let's go back to the board here and imagine that I now have rolled the dice and I have landed on Illinois, right? There's actually a card in chance or community chest that sends you to Illinois. So I'm gonna go here in the property deck and I have an opportunity to buy it, right? So here's Illinois here. So I'm gonna put that way over here. So I could buy Illinois, but let's say I really am running out of money to be able to buy this property and put a house on it. So here is where we learn about debt. Now, I also happen to own Boardwalk and I own Pennsylvania. These are very expensive properties, but sometimes the challenge with Boardwalk is not everyone lands on it. Now, there is a card that says advance to Boardwalk that will change your life. If you happen to be playing Monopoly and someone else has Boardwalk and you pull that card, right? But let's say as a strategy, I want you to notice something. On this card, there's something that says mortgage value $200. Mortgage value is $160 with Pennsylvania. So I can actually mortgage these. And what you do in Monopoly, as some of you remember, you turn it over when it's been mortgaged. This means if anyone lands on it, they don't have to pay anything. The bank owns it, okay? And I get $200 from the bank and $160. So that is $360 from debt that I can get. And I can use that $360 and I can buy this property, which is $240. And now I have all 3 of these properties, all my rent doubles, right? And if I want, I might even be able to buy a house, depending on how much money I have. But what did I do? I took properties that I have, I turned it into money through debt. So this is a beautiful tool we're learning in Monopoly. I mortgaged the property, so that is now debt, but I used the debt to create an investment. See, that is good debt that we talked about earlier. So now I invested in a property, I was able to improve that property, and now that property is going to generate revenue for me. Now, here's the beauty of it. The thing about debt, of course, we don't want to be bogged down with debt, but the beauty about debt is as I make more money, I can actually pay that debt down, pay it back, and now it doesn't have control over me anymore. And it now becomes something that I can leverage. So especially if you have like a credit line or something to that extent where you can use a credit line and you can buy something, and then when you pay that back, the credit line is still available and you can use it again, right? Great example. Or you can pull out some money out of your home, right? Like a refinance or a HELOC. You know, probably better to do a HELOC, right, on your home. And you're able to leverage that money to do something with it, right? A lot of times refinances actually set you back because it resets the whole loan. So it's a trick in terms of what's really going on with refinance, but that's for another day. But check this out. Let's go back to the board. So let's say I have $200. I can now unmortgage this Boardwalk, which allowed me actually to buy this Illinois property, but debt allowed me to use it, but now I'm back in the game on Boardwalk and I can start to rebuild and figure out what I want to do here. So this is what we're doing. We're leveraging debt and we're using it in a smart way. This is what a wealth-oriented mindset will do, realizing that debt is not evil. Bad debt is evil. And here in the game of Monopoly, we see that very clearly. Let's learn more about the next principle. All right, it's time for principle number 4, and that is Monopoly taught us about the art of negotiation. Now, negotiation is a very critical element, right? Because this is a fundamental wealth skill that you need, because for you to do deals, for you to do things that generate wealth, you have to know how to negotiate, right? So let's go to the whiteboard for a minute. And when we think about negotiation, okay? And when you think about negotiation, negotiation is actually a actual process, right? That we have to learn how to do. So in negotiations, there's a lot of things, right? So in negotiation, we want to understand how to create win-win scenarios, right? Where both people can win. We understand more about creating an offer, right? How do I begin to create an offer that someone is attracted to, right? We also learn how to evaluate different risks, right? So when I'm negotiating in Monopoly, I have to think about the impact that it could have on me later. I have to think about what type of offer I can make to actually persuade that person that this might be a good situation for them. You know, we also deal with communication skills, right? Learning how to communicate and to talk. It taught you how to get out of your comfort zone. If you don't talk and communicate, you'll find eventually you can only go so far in Monopoly if you can't communicate. If you don't know how to talk, if you don't know how, to really consider certain things, right? The other thing is to be able to deal with pressure, right? So one thing about Monopoly is you start to play, you feel forms of pressure, and you have to decide how can you negotiate through that pressure, right? When you're in a bind, when you're in a situation, how do I deal with that pressure and leverage negotiation to help release some of that pressure? Let's go to the board. I'm going to tell you some stories and explain why negotiation is so important and why it can be learned in Monopoly. All right, now we're at principle number 4, and we are dealing with negotiation. Negotiation is a critical element in Monopoly, and to all those who have played Monopoly with me, sometimes this is where they trying to say that I try to do little things. But listen, don't believe any of that. If you run into anyone who's played Monopoly with me, don't listen to them. I've really played by the rules. I played legit. I just try to play smart with negotiation. You got to learn how to negotiate. If you agree to it, you can't get mad at me. You agree to it. So let's talk about negotiation, though. Let's go to the board. Let me show you an example. And this is something that I did one time that really made some people furious. So let me, when we talk about negotiation, all over the board, we have ways of leveraging what we have. So in this situation, I've got 3 properties here. I want to protect these, right? So when I'm dealing with negotiation, I'm thinking about how can I protect the things that are most important? Some things I have, maybe like this boardwalk or this mortgage Pennsylvania, this might be more available for things that I might be willing to do. I might be willing to use this as a sense of strength or power to someone else who needs it if they have something that I need. So the whole time in the game of Monopoly, as we look around the board, we're watching what is going on and we're evaluating who has what do they need, and what do I need. So I want to just talk to you about this for a minute. When you're thinking about wealth generation, you have to be able to communicate. You have to watch what's going on in the market. You have to see what's happening with people around you. You have to see what's going on with situations around you. You have to think about, are there ways you can create win-win situations that benefit everyone, right? So sometimes this might allow you to buy a business or buy a property, being able to negotiate with someone about a specific deal. All these things are a part of negotiation, bartering with other business owners, thinking of ways to get people to, maybe do something because you found a way to find that common ground, right? So let me explain something to you. Now, here was a situation. So I'm going to go back to a situation here, and we're going to pick some of these houses, and I negotiated to get, let's say, somebody was nervous because they didn't want me to get all these, properties, right? So here, let's say I had all 3 of these, and I already got the golds right there, so I'm doing kind of good. And So let's put some houses here, 4 houses here. So what I negotiated was, so let's say I was in a situation. So let's say we got Virginia and we got States and we got St. Charles. So let's say I was in a situation where I had these two. I also had money, but I didn't have St. Charles. I needed St. Charles. So let's say somebody really wanted Boardwalk and I really wanted St. Charles. Because Boardwalk is a very expensive property, somebody might say, well, man, Boardwalk is worth way more than St. Charles. But they're afraid that if I get all 3 of these, then I might have an advantage in the game. So now we're getting into negotiation. And now we're getting into thinking and working out. This is what you have to do in real wealth generation. You're thinking about all these things when you're working on a real estate deal, when you're talking to a specific individual, and you're thinking about what stock to buy, whatever things are, you're thinking this way. These are skills you're learning right from the game of Monopoly. So let's go back. So what I did, I said, look, I'll give you this boardwalk and I'll give you some money in exchange for having this. And when I buy my hotels, you see, I already got 4 properties here, but when I decide to buy my hotels, you won't have to pay. Now, this is really, are you going to get a free pass, whatever? Now, some of this is house rules. Sometime you can play where this time of game, you're not going to give free passes, or we're not going to say no one doesn't have to pay. That's up to the house rules. But this particular time, the house rules was kind of loose. So it said you don't have to pay or you get a bunch of free passes. So they were like, oh my God, I will do that deal. So let's go back to the board here, and you can see my house is all nice here. So what the one thing that they failed to think about was, let me go back and look at you again. So you saw the houses. I never committed to buy the hotels. So I never bought the hotels. So they had to pay me, right? So you notice the hotel is $750, but 4 houses is $625, right? And on one of these, the hotel is $900, but the houses is $700. So my negotiation was real. If I got the hotels, I was going to hold up to that, but I just never bought the hotels. So they still had to pay me. So they were like, oh my God. And so, but this was a negotiation, right? And sometimes it depends on, now, they still had to land on it. I could have landed on Boardwalk, but the dice fell my way and I came out victorious again. And I kept the lineage going. Parker Brothers, I explained that earlier. This is something that should happen, periodically and most of the time, majority, because it's in my legacy, my heritage. But this is negotiation. This is critical in business. If you don't do this, and I'm using a funny example, but this is so important. What do you agree to? Why did you agree to it? Did you think through everything before you did it? This is a critical principle. We're building wealth through the game of Monopoly. We have to watch, we have to look, and we have to listen. Let's learn about the next principle. All right, it's time for principle number 5. This is, again, a very important principle, and it is a word that the wealthy understand very well called diversification. Let's head to the whiteboard. So when we think about this term, diversification, okay, so this is a fancy word to actually mean that we don't want all of our opportunity, resources, investments in one place. So being able to understand how to actually have multiple ways that you are creating wealth, right? So not through only one type of thing. So we want to be able to create opportunities in which I've got some wealth coming from A and some wealth coming from B and some wealth coming from C. So there's some subtle lessons we can learn right in the game of Monopoly that teaches us that there's many different ways to generate wealth, but you have to understand the different dynamics. And some people make catastrophic mistakes playing the game of Monopoly, not understanding some of the value in diversifying the way that your wealth is coming in. Let's head to the board and let's see this in real time. All right, we're here back at the board, and it's time to break down principle number 5, which is diversification. Now, we want to learn about diversification, and in Monopoly, that actual wealth principle is built into the game, but you have to notice it. So I want to just kind of explain something. We have different properties here. We kind of been walking through this. I've got different properties that I own, but I want you to understand there's some other things in Monopoly that sometimes don't get enough attention. So we have our properties, but did you know in Monopoly, we also have the railroads. So the railroads is a different type of property. And in fact, as you own more of them, you dramatically increase how much money you can make. So railroads is another form of investment. So we've got normal real estate, properties, houses, right? But we've got, actual railroads. Another thing is, check this out, we have utilities, right? Electric company and waterworks. So this represents a form of diversification. So if I own utility companies, right, almost like more of a business opportunity, right? And if I own railroads, almost like a business opportunity, then you have actual real estate property. So when we think about diversification, this is a principle we can learn right in Monopoly, that I don't want all my money to be in real estate. Well, what about business? What about stock? What about some other form of asset online that's generating money for me? What else can I do, right? What can I do to generate different forms of money so that I'm diversified? If one thing goes wrong, it doesn't crash my whole portfolio. So this is a beautiful wealth principle that's kind of hidden in Monopoly, that there's more than one way to generate the income. So we want to take that to heart and remember that we want to not only think of one way of generating wealth, we want to have a diversification. So again, we got property, we got railroads, we got utilities, we got diversification. Let's learn about the next principle. All right, we're at principle number 6, and we are going to deal with a word that I said earlier, but we're going to go a little bit deeper, and that is to understand risk management. So let's go to the whiteboard for a minute. Now, when we think about risk, right, and specifically, I said risk management. Now, this is very important to say management, right? Because there are other forms of risk that we know about, right? There is my risk tolerance, right? There's risk avoidance, okay? Now, these are different terms. Tolerance has to do with how much risk can I tolerate before I'm nervous or before I'm uncomfortable, okay? Risk avoidance is the whole approach of just getting away from risk, avoiding risk at all costs, right? So this is a distinct way of looking at life or approaching things when they, come in front of you. These are things that can impact people's ability to create wealth. But when we actually think about risk management, this is actually a much different, higher form of thinking about risk, is to understand that risk must be managed. Now, when we're managing risk, we may consider the level of tolerance we have about the particular situation, and we have to manage that tolerance. We have to understand we may want to increase or reduce that tolerance, right? Well, why would I increase or reduce my tolerance? Well, it is all depending on the opportunity. So if I see an opportunity great enough, I might have a higher risk tolerance. If I don't think the opportunity is good enough, I might have a lower risk tolerance, right? Then I must decide when I'm managing risk when I want to avoid. Now I'm managing. I'm not living in tolerance and living in avoidance. I'm managing when to be tolerant and when to avoid. It's a total different way of thinking. So there are some things that you know right away in your approach to Monopoly, some risks that you just don't want, and you have to make those decisions. Let's go over to the Monopoly board and understand a little bit more about how this works. All right, now we have arrived at principle number 6, and we're going to go deeper here at the board. And I want to talk about the importance of risk management. So when you're looking at this board, let's take a look at this board, okay? And I want you to understand, I only have a certain amount of money here. Let's say, for example, that now, let's take one of these $500, and I'm going to put it under free parking for fun because, I just like that house rule that you can have. And I only have, I've got less money now. I just lost $500. So if I land on a property, so let's take the car here and let's land on Park Place. Okay. Now when we think about Park Place presents a lot of opportunity. Okay. Park Place can create a lot of things that I can potentially do. The issue is Park Place costs $350. Now, this $500 will cover that Park Place, but let's assess the risk. Okay. So I've got this $500 bill, but let's assess the risk. So I could buy Park Place for $350, lose a big chunk of my money. People might land on Park Place, and because I have, traded away Boardwalk, if you remember in one of my earlier examples, I don't have Boardwalk, but now I have Park Place. So I have leverage against the person who has Boardwalk for negotiation. But there's a risk that that person never works with me. They're upset at me because I did the whole hotel thing. They won't work with me. Sometimes people get mad at you in Monopoly and they don't care if they lose. They just don't want you to win. Can somebody tell the truth for me? If you're in the chat and you experienced that, give me some comments in the chat. If you know somebody got personal. I had one time, I'm going to say this. And I hope they see this. I had a time I was playing Monopoly. They had already bought a shirt to say, "We beat you," before the game started. So at the very end, when I was going to win, they just start giving their property to each other. You know who you are. You know who you are. They just start giving their property to each other to make sure I lost so that I could have to see this t-shirt. That's all right. I never forgot that. It's still coming out right now after all this time. I'm still holding on to it. But anyway, back to what I'm saying. Risk. So think about this. So I could take that risk and buy that property, or let's look back on the board. Remember, I got all of these red properties. Well, check this out. A house here costs $150. I could use this $500 and I could buy at least 3 houses. So think about the risk of missing out on an opportunity to have Park Place, to have more negotiation power with whoever has Boardwalk, or building up my houses more for this whole area that I'm actually developing. Which would you choose? Would you forego the Park Place and let it go up for auction and other people get it? Would you take it off the market so no one can get it? Or would you basically buy it and hope to make more money and focus on a later strategy of building these houses so you can control the board, and you're going to pass go in a little bit. You're going to get $200 and maybe you can get at least 1 house. This is what we talk about with risk management. What is your risk tolerance? Do you have risk avoidance? What is it that you're managing? How far will you go? These are the things we deal with when we're dealing with risk. And you can see, you find these details, if you pull them out, right in the game of Monopoly. Let's go to the last principle. All right, we have made it to principle number 7, and this is so important. Now, before I tell you principle number 7, I want to just remind a lot of you to come here and you watch these videos. I hope you really enjoy some of the content I'm kind of putting out for you. But listen, I get so many people to come in and just view these videos and they leave a comment, but you don't hit the like button. You don't hit the notification bell. So I just want to say, before I continue with this session on Monopoly, before we get to number 7 here, hey, make sure you take the time, drop me a like, make sure you leave a comment. Because if you enjoy this content, I definitely enjoy delivering it, but I really appreciate you not just being a looky-loo, but make sure you take the time to do that. All right, enough on that. Let's get back here. Let's go to principle number 7. When we think about principle number 7, we're really dealing with long-term planning. Now, let's go to the whiteboard. Now, this is very important when we think about long-term planning. Okay? So, the thing is here, we're dealing with long term. Now, I know in the sense of Monopoly, we're not talking about years, right? But the whole concept of understanding that we have to know how to think beyond your next move. So remembering that Monopoly is essentially, right? Monopoly is a game of moves. Every time you get those dice, you can decide what type of move you want to make. Every time it's your turn, right? You can decide what you want to do. So long-term planning is the ability, right, to see the moves ahead, right? Not just your next move. And we learn this in Monopoly, and if you don't, and you only think about the near term or the short term, you'll find yourself in a situation where you are doing good for a minute, but in the end, you can come out in a place that is not where you desire to be. It's happened to so many people so many times. Let me tell you a few examples of it. Let's head over to the board. All right, we are now at the final step. We're back at the board. And I want to talk about another wealth principle in detail on the board now when we talk about long-term planning. So in Monopoly, one of the greatest mistakes you could ever make, I'm going to let you know a little secret here, is you have to think long-term in the game. You can't just think about the short term. You can't think about the quick win. You can't think about just making a quick dollar. You have to look at the whole board. You have to think about the entire strategy of what you're trying to do. Now, that strategy may adjust based on the type of properties you ended up landing on. You might like a certain plan, but you didn't get the properties you like to get, so your plan has to change. So, for example, if I happen to get, let's go to the board here, if I happen to get all 4 railroads and the 2 utilities, my plan may be different than if I started off getting these 3 particular properties that I love. I might have to make a different plan if I only had 2 of these railroads and I wasn't getting anything else. My goal might be, how can I get these other 2 railroads so I have an advantage? You have to begin to think long term. Right now, if I had this current scenario and I had these properties on the board, right, and I was thinking about what I would want to do. Well, let's look back at the board here. You can see here, this corner is all controlled. I've got control of these reds. I would long term want to see if I could get all of this to have hotels all the way to this red. That is a plan. If I have a long-term plan of doing that, it may dictate the decisions I make. And I want to store up enough money and enough capital to be able to slowly start changing these over, right? So think about it. If I could get these, and this would cause me to lose my deal with the other person, but maybe we got 6 other people playing or 5, and they got to still pay me on my hotels, right? So it still is a good negotiation. So if I get hotels here, right, and I got to the point where I built these up, and now my plan is to look like this, and I see it, right, in my vision. If that's really my goal, then I'm going to plan and carry myself in a certain way in my decisions throughout the game. So in wealth, we have to think long term. Now, someone else might say, I don't want hotels. I make enough with 3 houses. I want to control the board. I want to have property on every side of the board, so every side of the board I can make money. That's a different long-term plan. Someone else can have a plan of storing up money where I'm going to get a little area where I can build an empire, where I can at least build some cash flow. I'm going to put it in a high traffic area, but I'm going to hold on to my cash. So as people start buying up everything and they don't have enough cash, they're going to need me. And I'm going to negotiate them out of their property, right? Man, I'm giving y'all some little secret sauces here right now. I got to be careful. I'm saying a little bit too much about Monopoly, but I just want you to know, you got to have a long-term plan. You can't just keep doing this. I shared a few with them, but few with you, and maybe put some of yours in the chat. What are some strategies that you use? How do you think when it comes to Monopoly? What's your approach, right? Put something in the comment, right? Let's have a little fun here. Like, what do you do in your planning for Monopoly? What's your favorite properties, that you use to make sure you are set up the way that you want to be? Do you have a plan? Do you have an approach? Or do you just roll the dice? These are all things you have to think about, but the key is long-term planning is essential if you really, really want to be wealthy. Now it's time for some final thoughts. All right, I want to give you some final thoughts about Monopoly, and I want you to understand that what we just went through and what we have talked about in this episode is so important. Take it seriously. When you think about wealth generation, when you think about wealth creation, it may have looked like I was just playing a game. But let me tell you something. Lean in a little bit. Let me tell you something. Did you know this whole thing was a game? Everything we're doing is a game. You ever think about your credit score? There's a game being played. There's a reason that everything is set up a certain way. And if you don't learn the rules of the game, if you don't learn what to do, you might think it's just a little Monopoly game I was showing you, but you got to learn the game of life. You got to learn the game of wealth. You got to learn how all this stuff is set up to make sure you don't lose money that you don't have to, and you don't stop money from coming into your life that could, simply because you didn't know things, because intentionally we were withheld information all throughout our school years, from elementary to all of the middle school, high school, even into college. It was hid from us what we really needed to know about wealth. Why were we learning about things that we were going to never use? And no one told us about the things that we had to use every single day if we wanted to survive. You need to take this seriously. Don't see this as just a game of Monopoly. This is a game of your life. Think about it for a minute. The fact that banks can loan money up to 10 times more than what you put in there. When you put your money in the bank, what is really happening to it? thinking about the reality of what's really going on. All of the tax code that was created at the time, when you look at the central banking system and when the IRS was started, and how all of this came together to create a system to make sure a certain amount of people who live a certain life can have wealth beyond measure and not even have to pay taxes, and others who are really straining to survive have to pay the most. All of these things don't have to be if you learn the rules. The tax code was not built to hurt us. It actually is trying to show us how not to pay taxes. If you study the code from that perspective, these are the rules that I have to follow to not pay taxes. It's not rules to make me pay taxes. It's the rules built by the wealthy. Here's all the ways you can end up not paying taxes. So what are we trying to do? We got to find and surround ourselves with people who have the right knowledge about wealth, who have the literacy needed to actually take our mind to a higher level. Do the things that we don't want to learn. We don't want to learn the rules of the game. Because we don't take the time to learn, people are counting on us remaining ignorant so that we can continue to have money made off of us instead of allowing money to be made for us. If you don't learn how to create wealth and assets to generate wealth, many times you are the asset that's generating wealth for someone else. And so I invite you to take this seriously and understand how to play the game that's really not a game. I hope you take this to heart. I'll see you next time on our next episode. I'm Michael E. Parker, the CEO Maker. May God bless you.